Religious fundamentalism challenges the negative cultural and spiritual aspects of globalization. The environmental movement challenges the negative environmental impact of globalization. So, I just want to end this podcast with a very quick overview of the environmental movement to the present day. In the 20th century, human beings greatly increased the impact they had on the Earth, much more so than any other point in history. And human beings have an increased impact on the globe for three main reasons. The first is population growth. There was an explosion of population in the 20th century. There were 4 times as many people on Earth in the year 2000 as there were in the year 1900. The second is the discovery and overuse of fossil fuels, coal in the 1800s and oil in the 1900s. The third is economic growth. Not only is the population much bigger, but each person on average is having a much bigger impact on the Earth today than any other point in human history. Now, the world is in a situation where we have an industrialized developed world and a developing world desperately trying to industrialize. Today, there are about 7 billion people on Earth, but people in the developed world have much more of an impact on the Earth than people in the developing world. For example, the average North American uses 50 to 100 times more energy than the average person in Bangladesh. So, what are the biggest environmental problems in the world today? More people means we need more land to grow more food. To get this land, we have to cut down forests. Forests provide habitat for plants and animals, and maybe most importantly, they remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Deforestation is a major environmental problem. Modern industry creates air pollution. Air pollution is worst in major cities with a lot of heavy industry. In 2002, a United Nations conference on the environment in Mexico estimated that 35,000 people a year are killed because of air pollution. An issue that received a lot of attention in the 1980s and 1990s was the depletion of the ozone layer because of, among other things, chemicals called CFCs, or Freon, that come from aerosol cans and refrigerators and air conditioners. But the most significant environmental problem is, of course, climate change, and that's fossil fuels emit heat-trapping greenhouse gases that are slowly warming the Earth. But one of the unique challenges of environmentalism is that the most serious issues require a global response. So, in short, an environmental movement has arisen in response to these environmental problems. And there's a long history of concern for human impact on the environment. For example, in the 17th and 18th century, poets in England, the Romantic poets like William Blake and William Wordsworth, criticized the impact of the Industrial Revolution, criticized the impact that all this industry was having on the beauty of England. But the environmental movement, or the green movement, didn't gain a mass following until the second half of the 20th century. And like with feminism, the rise of the environmental movement is closely connected to a book. For the environmental movement, this book is Silent Spring by the American environmentalist Rachel Carson. Silent Spring raised concerns of the impact of pesticides and other chemicals on the environment and human health, and warned of a future where the songs of birds may never be heard again. The book really touched a nerve in people and is credited for launching the environmental movement in the United States. North Americans and Europeans go on to join environmental groups, and the purpose of these environmental groups was to lobby political parties to pass legislation that will protect the environment. The modern environmental movement took hold first in the developed world, but it soon spread to the developing world, so much like feminism. The concerns of environmentalists in the developing world were different than the concerns of environmentalists in the developed world, also like feminism. Environmentalists in the developing world were much less concerned with things like the inherent rights of nature and wilderness protection for the sake of wilderness protection than they were with ensuring their basic survival. So movements in the developing world sought to protect the livelihood of farmers and the livelihood of herders in the face of deforestation and poisoning of the soil because of mining. So it was a much more immediate concern on immediate livelihood in the developing world. In the developed world, more of a concern for future generations and harming the aesthetic beauty of the earth, at least initially. By the late 20th century, environmentalism had become a major global issue, and today governments are pressured by environmental groups to pass legislation that limits environmental impact. Today, political parties, Canada, United States, all have platforms, talking points regarding the environment and what their parties are going to do for the environment. And I'm just going to close with this issue of climate change and environmentalism in general as a global concern that requires a global response. So, a global response is something that's very hard to come by in a world with so many different countries. So the world's most well-known international organization, the United Nations, has taken a leading role fighting climate change at the global level. The Kyoto Protocol to fight climate change was developed in 1997 at a climate change conference in Kyoto, Japan. The aim was to reduce greenhouse gases emitted by developed nations based on the levels of greenhouse gases emitted in 1990. The European Union had to reduce their 1990 emissions by 8%, the United States by 7%, Japan by 6%, all by the year 2012. The only developed country that didn't sign the Kyoto Protocol was the United States. And the United States are also the world's biggest polluter, per capita and overall. So the United States' refusal to limit the amount of greenhouse gases that they emit really damaged the reputation of the United States in the international community. It lowered the international community's opinion of the United States. But the United States isn't the only problem. Canada has been the subject of a lot of international criticism in terms of climate change lately as well. But the Kyoto Protocol and climate change in general really symbolizes that we live in a global world with global problems that don't end with boundaries and states. Environmentalism could very well be the defining issue of the 20th century. It's extremely important moving forward, but this, along with everything else addressed in this podcast, is an unfinished story. So this is the end of episode 29. This is also the end of the AP World History podcast, so I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank you all for listening, and best of luck on the advanced placement exam.